Welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. We're going to have a great show here for you today. Today on the show, we're talking about marketing freedom. We're going to do some reminiscing, going down memory lane, so to speak. August 1st is what we call in Western Canada Marketing Freedom Day. And it's the anniversary of the CWB, the Canadian Wheat Board, losing its single desk monopoly on some of the crops we called board grains. Wheat, durum, malt barley would be, we're going to get filled in here on, if I've missed any, I apologize. But we're going to have a lot of fun. If you have any questions, comments, we'd love to hear from you. All you have to do, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, you enter your question in the comment box on the platform that you're watching on. And for all of you that are watching at realagriculture.com/live, I very much appreciate that as well. Let's bring in today's guest. Today's guest is Jeff Nielsen. Jeff, how are you?
Good afternoon, Shaun. Thank you. Doing good.
Yeah, good. Okay, so the reason that Jeff is here, though everybody knows Jeff now in today's world as being the president of the Grain Growers of Canada. Jeff farms in Olds, Alberta. But Jeff was actually, at the time, while the drama was going down, he was a Canadian Wheat Board director. And so, which presents an entirely very odd situation and circumstance. And we're going to hear a little bit about that with Jeff here today. Jeff, before we get started, how are the crops in Olds?
They're actually right around me looking good, but the hail's been on either side of me, and we definitely don't want that. That's not good where you see it, and there's drawn out areas, of course, so it's a mixed bag up here for sure.
I've got a few people asking me, is this a Transformer shirt? Yes, it is. Absolutely. Maybe that ties very well to today's topic, right?
Yeah.
We transformed the way that wheat was marketed in Western Canada. Jeff, you were you were on the board of directors for the Canadian Wheat Board. What was the timeline of that, and how did you get involved?
The transition to a farmer director board happened, I think, in 1990. Minister Goodale at the time, the ag minister, allowed the board to become farmer, what he called at the time, farmer directed, with 10 directors coming from the permit book holders, elected by permit book holders, and then 4 appointed by the government of the day, and the CEO was agreed on by the board members to be appointed by the government. So in 99, Jim Chatney, who was the director for what we call District 2 in central Alberta here, termed out. He was the original from Alberta. He was the original marketing choice director that got on the board. He fought strongly for marketing choice, but he turned out. So I was asked if I was interested in the position, and I was elected by farmers in my area to the Canadian Wheat Board.
So, like, some of this, it's not that long ago, but you kind of forget about some of this. It had to be unusual to be on a board where, like, we've all been on boards where there's conflict, where people don't agree on the strategy. And sometimes you can work that out and sometimes you can't, but you do need to function as a team, right? Whether you agree or not. This was in a different stratosphere of everybody not being on the same page.
Oh, very much so. In Jim's era, the chairman of the board, he was the lone wolf out, technically. Management was against change at that time. The board definitely was. So Jim was, he has told to leave the room on several occasions for what may be called disobedience or something like that. So that was unfortunate. And he just actually, there were times he said that he just went straight to the airport. He says, well, if you're going to tell me to leave the room, I'm going to the airport. I'm going home. I got better things to do. So, and he did. It was very frustrating for him. When I got on the board, we had a new CEO, Ian White, that at the time Minister Straw appointed to the board. And honestly, management was in a different frame of mind. Ian White was a very good CEO, brought a whole new level of experience to that position. And of course, government appointed Harper appointed 4 of his people as directors, I guess you want to call it that way, businessmen, professionals. And Henry Voss and I were the 2 farmer elected directors. So out of the 15, the CEO never voted on anything. So out of the 14, there are 6 of us promoting change, promoting choice. and 8 that didn't want change or choice.
Yeah, and that's referred to as the group of eight, the
Yeah.
8 board members that were wanted to hold fast and keep the single desk.
Yes, indeed. And
Yeah.
they held the majority. So
Yeah, and I know you can't speak for management. They have their own perspective, but it had to be super difficult for them to try to do the day to day with some of this future drama happening behind the scenes in their own boardroom, was it not?
there was, like, we were held to what we call standards of any board that generally people get on. You have standards of governance, you have code of conduct in that. Um, I was called out for a few letters I wrote to people I thought I needed to respond to, the farmers in my area. And then, I mean, Shaun, you showed me a clip the other night that you recorded quite a few years ago. It was quite interesting going down that memory lane, but it seemed a very two-sided story. The group of 8 could do what they want, say what they want, yet Henry and I seemed to be one that would be chastised. And it was even to the point where management was being not harassed, not abused, but you'd have it was beyond a director's responsibility to be contacting staff. In some of the cases, they did put it that way.
So the interview that you're referring to, and I did share that with you. I kind of went down memory lane here the last couple of days, sort of thinking about this issue and reminding myself of some of the things went on. But and one of the things was the interview that you talked about, and there was this CWB traveling roadshow. And if I remember right, you had a lot of criticism for those funds being used to have a roadshow to lobby for the single desk to stay. You and I, from I think one of those stops, did an audio interview that you can find at realagriculture.com. And Jeff, you spoke your mind that you did not agree with what was going on, how the funds were being used, and if I remember, you got your wrist slapped.
Oh, I did get stopped, but it was in the last days of the throes of the monopoly, so I took it on the chin. But you're right; they had, I think it was 7 meetings across Canada, and they started in Manitoba, but they actually had groups following them. They had to the extreme, so they had the Communist Party of Canada following them and setting up a booth at every meeting.
The Communist Party of Canada?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And of course, at the time, you had the Friends of the Canadian Wheat Board, you had the Canadian Wheat Board Alliance, and then maybe a couple others. And some political parties, such as the NDP, were in support of the monopoly, and that they would be there. But they were. This was after. This was actually held after Prime Minister Harper got his majority, and through Minister Minister Ritz gave us notice that we needed to change. Change was going to happen. And that's where I think management started picking up the ears more. Were ready to work with us, but once again, we got stalled by the Group 8. And they decided to go out on the campaign trail, if you so say, call it that, and have these meetings. My first one was in Medicine Hat. I refused to sit at the front with my fellow directors in the meeting. I was criticized by some producers in the crowd. My meeting was in Camrose, I think, a couple days later.
Yeah.
I had good support there, but there was still a lot of flack that I received. A couple days later, I went up to the Peace Country. Henry Voss's meeting was in Falher, and it was surprising how there were just the discussion in anger, of some people wanting change and not realizing that the benefits of change, I guess, is the best way to put it.
So at that time, even though the sort of the directive had been given, you were feeling that tension at those meetings between farmers on the opposite sides of the issue of, we can't do this, we're going to, here's the consequences, or we can do this, here's the opportunity. And that was actually, you were feeling that tension in the room.
Oh, definitely. It was clear. It was very clear. It was at some of the meetings, there was pure anger. Like, I'm trying to think now. You struck a chord there. I think we might have had to have security a couple of those meetings. Maybe I'm confusing with another one, but I think we could have had to have, some sort of security there, whether it's RCP or what. I can't remember right now.
Maybe you're confusing with like a Van Halen concert or something.
Well, it could have been that, or who knows.
Okay, so and I'm not looking for you to tell any dirty laundry here, but the going back to the boardroom setting where you have people on very opposite ends of the spectrum, there had to be it had to be really really tough for people to sort of put past their differences and like go for supper at night or tend to some of the other business the board because the board obviously there was lots of other discussions at the board table just besides whether or not there was going to be a single desk or not.
Right.
So what was that like as a individual board member, the board dynamic of such opposing views?
Well, I think to a point, I think we're professional enough that we did the business that needed to be done as directors when we went there. As far as going through our due diligence of the reports, understanding where we were in the markets, what sales were made, what needed to be done, and that. I think we did work pretty well there. It was just a total division when it came to um, um, even just common fellowship. We would break for the day, and there would be a sign if we were in Winnipeg, all our meetings were in Winnipeg. Naturally, we were staying at the Fairmont. There'd be a sign on the Fairmont's board saying what meetings were being held in what rooms, and you'd see a CWB supper director meeting in Salon B or something like that. And here's Henry and I looking at each other and said, well, we're not invited to that one.
Wait a minute, is that a different CWB? It must be like Canadian Western Bureau. What is that CWB thing?
We don't know, but apparently, well, we did know it was them. They were doing their own little strategic planning sessions and having it in the hotel, and we just laugh about it. We go across the street to a nice restaurant and have good friendship, good supper. So.
Oh, so unique. It is such a it's so unique. And if you look at the history of time of this issue, there was drama happening at the level of the board, but there's a history here of a lot of drama around this topic. There were some farmers that purposely tried to cross the border, and there was jail time, which farmers trying to sell their wheat go to jail. You scratch your head now that the border's open, but yeah, there's a history here.
Well, I think we have to even step back. Yes, there's 13 farmers that went to jail for taking wheat into Montana from as little as a bag of wheat. Jim Chatney, who's actually a sitting director of the wheat board for Region 2, District 2 at the time, walked over a bag of wheat to donate to the 4-H club. It was an organized I guess protest you call it. There were semis there, Super Bs there, loaded wheat. They had the agreement to sell the wheat into Montana already made. They had contacted the press. They had contacted the police. They had contacted Border Security. Everything was known that they were coming. They went in. They were free to go into Montana, deliver the grain. Yet when they come back, okay, what are they going to do with them? And I think at the time the government really struggled, and they found some way, and I believe it was under the Customs Act, to change something that once they came back into Canada, their vehicles were seized at the border. So they're trapped there with no vehicles. They got rides home. They were charged, and the 13 of them did go to court. Some settled with the fines that were imposed that day. Yet some, and well, one in particular, I just pat Jim Chatney on the back. He said that, what the heck, I'll go to jail. And he served over a month, I think, in the Lethbridge Penitentiary there, and working on the farm. He worked on the penitentiary farm,
putting his skills to good use.
Yeah, and it was trying for a lot of those. Some of the farmers spent one night and then paid their fine and went home. But you saw farmers in tears on the court steps of Lethbridge there. It was hard to see that a government would put farmers in jail, but I want to step back to a few years prior to that. Eddie McEachern out of Manitoba tried to sell grain into Manitoba, and he was, I guess you could say, really abused by the legal system at that time. He was shackled in wrists and leg shackles, taken into court, strip searched many times, I guess. And he was just trying to do better for his farm by selling grain at a better price.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I had forgot about that story.
Yeah.
And like now, if you look at it here in 2020, as many crazy things that have happened in 2020, though that was kind of, it seems just so odd that those things were were happening at that time. Jeff, what was the point where you realized that we're past the apex? Like we've turned the corner. We're not going to go back, because there was the decision that Harper and Ritz had made, and the directive was coming, and but there was still a lot of fight. And in fact, the Friends of the Wheat Board are still battling this decision. But when was the point where you thought, okay, we're past the finish line here?
Probably right about that time when Minister Ritz gave us the directive. We had we had a presentation by management to buy 2 Lakers, the Lakers that run from Thunder Bay to the transfer terminals along the St. Lawrence Seaway and places. Honestly, it was a good business proposal. Unfortunately, the money would have had to come out from the pool accounts. We did approach the government to get financing of the government, and right then they said no. So, but that didn't stop the group of 8, you want to call it. They pushed to buy these Lakers, and we started to finance them. So they agreed to buy the Lakers. I think that was the moment I realized the change wasn't going to happen. It threw up that roadblock. It threw up that big to the government by saying, well, we're going to do it our way no matter what. Then they launched this traveling roadshow, as I call it. They launched advertising campaigns. I think it's about 1.5 to $2 million of advertising campaign based in Toronto and Montreal and Eastern Canada.
Yep.
Saying Western farmers are losing their monopoly because of the government. It was just a waste of money. And
the steamroller ad campaign.
Yeah.
Yes, because I remember we were at the Calgary. I think Minister Ritz was speaking at the Calgary Chamber of Commerce meeting about the change, and I remember being there to interview him afterwards in a scrum. And I remember, so the Friends of the Wheat Board had launched that Harper and Ritz are steamrolling farmers. They're steamrolling this through. And I remember Ritz of like only Ritz can, being quick, being so quick. And he said, steamroller, you better ask them who's steamrolling who. And I remember doing that interview in the scrum, and probably the camera was way too close to his face. And as we were trying to get it, there was lots of mainstream media there as well. And I remember interviewing Wayne Easter, who right now has the impossible task of trying to keep that committee in check with Prime Minister Trudeau testifying to committee, which we're competing with right now, Jeff. I can't. I know. This is way more important than what the Prime Minister is doing right now. But right. Wayne Easter is the chair of that committee. Anyway, I interviewed Wayne Easter, and I will never forget this. I said, well, here's what Minister Ritz says. And Easter comes back with, Mr. Ritz is dreaming in Technicolor. And I will never, ever forget that quote. Oh.
But it is funny, and I think Mr. Easter's changed his tune a bit. And honestly, we thought a lot of people thought there'd be issues after the Liberals gained power in 2015 there. But it was a wise choice on Ralph Goodale at the time. I can't remember what position he was in, but he says, no, we're not going to revisit that. That ship has sailed, literally, like the Lakers, they sailed. We're not going to revisit that. So
yeah, and like a lot of things, they become so polarized, right? I remember you brought up those Lakers, and I remember the Lakers where, like you said, hey, you were in the boardroom. There was a good business case for them, but outside, because the board was bringing that idea forward to purchase these 2 Lakers, people weren't even looking at that topic. They were just against it because the board was suggesting it. It was such a polarized time before social media.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you think you're right. You made a good point. You can see how an issue can take off now on social media, on Twitter or Facebook or wherever. It would be a really interesting experience if we had that technology back then.
Brian Kennedy says, this is way more interesting than the committee meeting. I appreciate that, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
we appreciate your unbiased opinion.
Yeah.
So Jeff, when they when the idea was being sold to Canadians on the why of this, there was a lot of both sides sort of saying, well, here, the doomsday of here's what's going to happen, and the opportunity of here's what could be. From your standpoint as a farmer, ex-director, did the opening up and getting rid of the single desk, did it live up to the promises that the free marketers were talking about at the time?
I honestly believe it did. We just happened to be in a good spot in 2012 with better grain sales. The just we were in a better position and prices were really good at the time. Having the ability to start signing, there are people. I think it's December 12th was when some of the first contracts signed. We can call Sherilyn Jolly Nagel right now. She was one of the first people to sign a Durham contract for August 1st of 2012. There's that opportunity that you could actually forward sell your own crops. It was that opportunity of choice and then change. And there's markets there that would support that. Naturally, commodities we face, of grains and oilseeds and that, are worldwide. And we face a challenge with that, with the continued growth of, you look at the former Soviet Union with the growth of their export program, stuff like that. But that's where we needed to play more of a role in open market. We need to deliver our grains into the market at a different time of year to offset the competition we face from other countries. And the Canadian Wheat Board was never really designed for that. They wanted equality across the 12-month period. Well, it doesn't really work in today's grain marketing avenues.
Yeah, well, especially from a cash flow perspective, I think that was the biggest negative, not being able to manage your own cash.
Mhm.
We were talking about the acronym of CWB. Who else could be having that meeting in the Fairmont in Winnipeg? Brian Voss says it was probably Canadian Western Bank. Jeff, you were misled all these years.
Yeah, no, I don't think so, but good try. So,
What else? Kara says, thanks for all that you do for Canadian agriculture, Jeff. So you got some people definitely giving you some support out there. One of the things that I often think about, Jeff, when it comes to what maybe hasn't worked out like maybe we thought, and I'm not saying it's,
mhm,
don't take this the wrong way, like, oh, we need to go back. Don't get me wrong. It is, I think it has to do with IP programs.
mhm,
I think that in general, people thought the board was holding us back from having more like niche IP. The board was only interested in a class. They were restricting us to this high quality. I think those are two examples where maybe we overthought, or maybe we're overstating what change would necessarily happen. We had 1 year of CPS. Everybody was growing CPS, and we killed it. And we've drifted back to the quality because that's how we can compete. Is that am I being fair there?
I don't think so in the CPS. The Canadian Wheat Board would not play with mid-grade wheats. That's like winter wheat people, growers had issues with the wheat board on selling their winter wheat. They wanted the 13.5 hard red springs, is where they had a premium. We had Japan locked in, and Japan really hasn't changed their buying tonnage since then either. Like they want a guaranteed amount of Canadian hard red 13.5 per year, no matter what. So we had to ensure they got that, or we still have to ensure they got that. But it was some of the mid grades. There's a lot of countries where CPS plays a better role for them, and the Canadian Wheat Board just really didn't want to go for that. They wanted to focus, and this is just my view, wanted to focus on those higher markets, and naturally they would sell to the lower end customers and claim that when they sold to those lower end customers, they were at the top of the market at that time. But that's where I think a lot of confusion came when we ended the wheat board and we had the grain trade solely making the deals, which they were actually making the deals to start with, but once again, it came to grading quality. But you would have a country that was continually buying, asking for a number two, maybe a lower protein, and they're technically getting a number one 13.5. Well, that's just the fact. That's what we grew that year. That's what they got. So we get into a year where they actually get what their contract says. They want a number two 11 protein. They actually get a number two 11 protein, but they're used to the 13.5.
Mm.
So we ran into a bit of a period right after the end of the wheat board where our customers were not really complaining, but they were actually getting what they actually ordered. And there's some confusion there. So I'm not sure if that's the right way to answer your question, Sean, or not. I might have
Yeah.
changed it.
No, when I talk to people overseas, even in the U.S., the single desk was not looked upon very favorably to do business with Canada. And I don't know if that's a function of the wheat board. There was some marketing controls. It was tough to do business. Like I don't know the whole context of that, but just in general, it's not spoken to, or it's not spoken about very well. Brian says, probably with a smirk on his face, it was a novel concept, being able to sell wheat in order to hold other crops that had better price potential, especially with larger yields. Yeah. Um, what about domestic processing? How do we sit on that? I think was it AGT Foods that had promised to do a Durham plant. There was a lot of excitement around that. I'm not sure
Yeah.
what happened there.
Well, there's a
Um,
couple past plans, but I can't really remember the story in them. I do remember clearly when it came to malt barley. There's a meeting in Ottawa with the Malting Association Canada. RAR Malt was there, Canada Malt was there, and they made it clear at that time that and oh gosh, who was the Canadian Wheat Board chair at the time? Unfortunately, he's passed away. Excuse me on that, but
yeah.
Ken Ritter, actually, Ken Ritter was the chair at the time. They had the meeting with Minister Ritz, and they said we will not invest in Canada unless we get be able to source barley from producers. I remember I have it in my notes still that Ken Ritter came back after that meeting and says, "Yes, we understand that barley farmers do not support the monopoly. Our own surveys, and I actually, when I got on the board, I looked at all the surveys that were conducted by the Wheat Board, and the one question when it came on marketing barley, there was never support for the Canadian Wheat Board marketing their barley, and it had to be any barley that was sent for export or for malt, and that really put a hamstring, I guess, on our local malting sector. And I just think about today, you look at our local craft beer market. Yes, it's struggling right now with COVID, but would we have this phenomenal growth in craft beer marketing if we hadn't had the ability for the red shed maltings to spring up, origin malting to
Right.
spring up, RAR to deal with the craft brewing industry in the U.S. and Canada, and Canada Malt as well. Like, would we have that there if we sold the monopoly? I'd be hard pressed to say yes.
Brian's got a question here. I think. Oh, I gotta get rid of that. Just hold on, Jeff.
Yeah.
Brian asks, can Canada realistically continue to be competitive growing wheat against global powerhouses like Russia, Argentina, etc.? Cost of production is higher and freight always an issue. I know, you know what, Jeff? This came up yesterday. I had Arlen Suderman on from StoneX, and we were having this discussion about how, from a wheat perspective, quality is kind of the northern plains like Montana, Western Canadian prairies. It's our game, and we've had a competitive advantage over other countries. Russia, in the South America crops. We're talking about soybeans, but they're upgrading their infrastructure. But Arlen had pointed out that now Russia, they were worried about just volume, but now they're starting to talk about quality. We need to stay on top of our game, as Brian points out.
Oh, I totally agree. Like they're a source of cheap grains right now, lower quality, but we know, and yeah, I think we're fully aware that's our biggest fear is they're going to start producing better quality grains. They have the equipment, they have the technology. It's just there's something missing there. Once they finally clue into that, we're going to be in trouble, and that's where it's not just Russia; it's still the South America that's producing more grains. It's if Australia gets out of this drought cycle, we've got them to worry about too. It's a big challenge, and being landlocked, as we know, we've had our other issues come to the railroads and everything else. How are we going to position ourselves going forward? What do we have to start working on? That's a good, very good question. I can't answer that one.
Well, yeah, it's definitely on the minds of a lot of people. John, who's watching on Twitter, says John Kowalczyk Farms in Alberta. Managing cash flow was the biggest issue during CWB. I felt. I think that was that way for a lot of the growers. They wanted They may not be better marketers. They might not be. They might be better, or they might be worse marketers than the CWB could have done. They just wanted control so they could manage their own cash flow. Their grain, their decision.
Oh, clearly, and you saw that with a shift of why did canola get so popular? And we have to think back early on. Canola was actually controlled by a wheat board Canadian Wheat Board quotas. And there's a lot of people, and Henry Voss was one of those that did a lot of work to get that change made. But why was there such a significant growth in canola? You look at the pulses as well. Farmers found crops that they could market on their own, and they're yet once again in anybody's rotation. Generally, wheat and barley is in the rotation someplace, and yet they're stuck on those ones.
Question or a statement here, sorry, from Jason Lenz watching on YouTube. Western Canadian farmers continue to be thankful for the trials and tribulations that leaders like Jeff Henry Voss and Jim Chatney went through in those difficult days of grain marketing change. And I think Jason sums it up very,
Yeah,
very well.
yeah, good.
Jeff, are you surprised that we still see, what is it, 8 years later now? I think it would be on Saturday.
Yeah.
8 years later, the friends of the CWB are still there, still going on this idea, or how should we interpret that?
I don't know. Somebody still feels that there is money missing, and to this day, I can swear that there never was. There's the thought that the contingency fund that did get started up after the Canadian Wheat Board did try to give some options, and they're producer payment options at the time. They're no more different than they are with contracts we sign now. If I agreed with my grain dealer to sell wheat at $6 this fall, and the market goes up to $6.50, they're going to take that $6.50. That's their right. I have agreed to a certain price. The producer payment options are the same way. The Canadian Wheat Board actually earned money by selling grain at a higher price and making some difference on that. There's other avenues, like we controlled the cash advance program at the time. There's money coming back from that. So that all went into the contingency fund. That was not pool money. So that there's no way to distribute that back to producers. So I think that's where some people still think that there's missing money and they want that money back, and there is no missing money.
Comment here or a question here from Ken. Ken says, "Don't get me wrong, as a malt grower, I'm extremely happy that CWB is gone, but did we perhaps give the CWB away with little monetary return from the assets being sold back to the farmer?" What do you think about that, Jeff?
Yeah. Well, what assets were there? We owned office building in Winnipeg. We had just started the agreement on the Lakers, and that was producer pool money that actually went into those. So I think we put a 10% deposit down. Physically, there's no assets. The office building was the only thing. You look at 550 employees, where we were at the height of the Canadian Wheat Board. Yeah, we had a lot invested in staff, but yeah, asset-wise, we didn't have much.
Jeff, what did you learn? Like, you've been heavily involved in boards since this. You'll never probably be on a board again that is like this situation. What did you take away from it as like a personal growth sort of thing?
Oh, good. That's honestly, good question. I think my experience coming from being a director with, first of all, United Grain Growers, I guess, and then Agro United, I took training as far as sound corporate governance, director training, and that. What I felt as a loss with the Canadian Wheat Board was the lack of respect for due diligence and proper governance. So that's led me to respect working with other boards better that way. I sit on one board currently where governance is still a bit an issue, but we won't get into that today. Yeah, I think it was a learning experience. It was really disappointing that once again, I think truly believe we had the majority of staff, senior management at least, on side that we could create change and develop an entity in some format. Maybe it would have survived, maybe it wouldn't. Unless you give someone a chance, you don't know. To add value for farmers.
Were you okay with the sale to now we have G3? That's kind of the evolution, I believe, if I'm following the right trail properly.
Yeah, that was the directive given when, like I said, I resigned in November prior to the Marketing Freedom Act bill being passed in Parliament. But that was the directive given. And I fully supported that directive given. They had 5 years to come up with a plan, start developing, and I believe the board at the time, under the direction of Chairman or CEO Ian White, started that process. They started looking at investing. They started buying facilities, as we know, in the prairies. Started looking at building facilities, and they had the opportunity to look at a sale, and they went for it. So, and we look at that now. We look at the growth of G3 across Western Canada. We look at G3 building that terminal on the north shore of Vancouver. You look at expansion. Patterson is building elevators. You look at P&H building or buying elevators as well. You look at Viterra and Richardson building elevators. It's expanding in Western Canada.
Got a text here from Carl. Where is Ian White now?
He went back to Australia, but that doesn't mean he stayed there. That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Geez, Jeff, we've been talking for 40 minutes about this. Who knew the CWB 8 years later could be so interesting? I don't know, Jeff. The only comparison I could possibly make, like I was just going to say that I don't think we'll ever live through this kind of drama again. The only comparative people like to make all the time is the future of supply management as like a comparative in terms of like a pillar coming down, but in some ways it's not the same. And one of the unique pieces about this story is the board dynamic, right? That you had people on one side and people on another side on a issue, and it was a fundamental ideological issue, and there was no middle ground. That's what makes this so unique. I don't know if we'll ever see something like this in our time in this industry.
I don't think so either. Like you mentioned, supply management. That is a purely Canadian domestic program. You look at marketing grain when you're marketing into foreign countries. That's totally different. And I'll go back to the Doha round of negotiations in the mid 2000s. There's a group of farmers that went to Geneva, Switzerland, and we actually Jim Chatney was with us. The wheat board sent a delegation, their chair at the time and two other directors, to sit with supply management and say, well, if we lose the Canadian Wheat Board, supply management's next.
Right.
And we went as a group of producers and farmers. No, that's not an issue here on the worldwide stage. That's a Canadian domestic issue. We see marketing choice as a benefit where we can do better for our farmers. So, yeah, and it came down to they try to use that angle quite a bit. That if you lose the one, then you're going to lose the other. Supply management, as you know, is fully supported by all parties in Canada. We're going through the PC leaders election here right now, and all three candidates are promoting supply management. So that's not even on the table at all.
Yeah, yeah. Have you? So people can still pool. Like G3 has a pool. Have you pooled? Have you pooled any wheat since this has all happened? You didn't even have to think about it. You just...
Well, no.
Have you looked at the pros?
I found some toothpicks with our name on it. So.
Wow, look at that. That's a collector's item.
Yeah, I thought I had a hat because we had Minister Rich sign a bunch of Canadian Wheat Board hats once, but I don't know where that is anymore. So, yeah.
Were you at where was the press conference in Saskatchewan that day? Do you remember? Were you there that day? I can't remember whose farm was that.
For the after in December there.
Yeah, wasn't there a big party, a big barbecue, like a big and Harper was there too, if I remember right.
That was at in Kindersley. He's one of the farmers that went to jail, and
I can't remember the name. I apologize if anybody in the family is watching. I apologize.
But that was kind of funny. That was August 1st of 2012, and the day before, I probably had my worst ever hailstorm and lost 2/3 of my crop. And I had a fellow, Carmen Reed, come at 6 in the morning. He says, "Well, we'll drive out together." And he gets in my yard and says, he looks at my crop and he says, "Jeff, do you want me to drive?" And I said, "Carmen, I need something to do today." I said, "I may be angling towards a ditch every now and then. Don't worry about it." But we went out to Kindersley. Prime Minister Harper's out there, and he actually pardoned the 13 farmers that went to jail. So that was
Right.
Quite an event to see that he was pardoned. And I wish I could find. Can't. They'll
So,
come to me in 10 minutes after we get off the call.
oh, that's okay.
But Art Macklin. No, not Art Macklin. Oh, Art Macklin. No bad choice. Art Waldy.
Okay, Waldy's. Okay.
And
Oh
yeah,
man.
it was at his son's farm and all that. So it was a great afternoon.
I've always found this whole, as I've said, this is the most fascinating drama. Ken says, any plans for a book? I don't know, Jeff. If we wrote a book, would anybody read it?
I think the person that needs to write the book is Jim Chatney. Like he was a storyteller on his own right, and just the experience. Like he didn't do it. Like he didn't. He went there on a mission to try to work towards marketing freedom. He wasn't belligerent about it. He wasn't stubborn-headed about. Well, maybe stubborn-headed about
I
it.
think he was stubborn. He was
But
in jail for a month, Jeff.
yeah, uh, but to be disrespected in the boardroom, and when they had like the annual Christmas supper or something like that, his wife Olive was unfortunately um, um, not treated well
Mhm.
either. So it showed that they didn't respect Jim or his wife, and she refused to go to any group events after that. I was told. But it just showed at the time that there wasn't the ability to have a different opinion, and that's unfortunate. And this is what happened at the day, and um, it is what it is. And it's some memories at times you just don't want to remember. So,
Jeff,
but actually, the book would come best from Jim. On From the Canadian Wheat Board side, we had a corporate secretary that was there for 35 years, and we the positive directors took her out for supper one of our last days when we were in Winnipeg. And what should have been like an hour and a half supper ended like 5 hours sitting in a, like we did get a private room in a restaurant in downtown Winnipeg. But just the conversation we had, she started as a secretary, moved her herself all the way up to the corporate secretary position. And yeah, she had stories from previous years when they had the commissioners appointed, and then he went to the farmer directed board. So she was between Jim Chatney and this woman. That there would be one great book.
yeah, I feel like I have more interviews to do on this topic now. You've kind of inspired. There is some characters in this that
Yeah.
I think we need to explore this more.
Oh, I think yes.
Jeff, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you doing this. It is such a unique story, and it is a part of Western Canadian agricultural lore at this point, and it's not too far away though. It's only 8 years, but it does seem so long ago now. And you were a big part of that narrative, a big part of that story, and for a little bit in a little bit of way, you really helped put RealAg on the map by doing those interviews when you were a board of director. So I appreciate that too, very very much.
Well, thank
So.
you.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, and obviously thanks for all your hard work and everything you do at the Grain Growers of Canada as well. So, hey, Jeff, thanks a lot for for being our guest here today.
Hey, have a great long weekend. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, really, really appreciate you tuning in. That was a really, really fun discussion. Really fun. Like I said, there are so many unique angles to that story about how the Canadian Wheat Board single desk was taken away, or it ended, and farmers had marketing freedom, which is just something that seems just so natural. It should be that way anyway. And like I said, it wasn't whether farmers thought they would be better marketers or worse marketers than the board. It was about control and my grain, my decision. Although there are people, as we talked about, the Friends of the Wheat Board, still very adamant that Canadian farmers lost in this decision. Like all topics, it takes two sides. So big thanks to Jeff Nielsen for joining us here today on RealAg Live. Make sure you tune in today to RealAg Radio. We got a Farmer Rapid Fire. We're also going to play a portion of my discussion from yesterday's RealAg Live with Arlen Suderman from StoneX as well. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.